South Africa and the United States have committed to bolster relations in different sectors such as science, trade and leadership. International Relations Minister Dr Naledi Pandor has thanked the United States for its support. Pandor is hosting the U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken in Pretoria. Ziyanda Ngcobo is standing by to give us a debrief of what she heard there. And we heard from Anthony Blinken saying that South Africa and the United States have shared priorities, and in terms of the topics that will be discussed, they reflect the scope of those shared priorities.
Certainly do. I mean, there are two things that stood out for me. It's how, our Minister Naledi Pandor expressed disquiet, if I could say, that it was a quiet 7 years of the U.S. not coming to visit South Africa. And this is why she emphasized the importance of this visit. And you'll recall that, the stance that the former U.S. President Donald Trump took towards Africa reflects that it was not really a priority on his foreign relations agenda. And so this visit by Anthony Blinken is an indication of trying to, claw back then those shared interests as both of them expressed. You would have heard as well the issue of climate change really also being on the agenda, spoken about by Blinken, speaking about a just energy transition, which is also a conversation that is currently taking place here at home when we look at our energy crisis and the plans that need to be put in place about renewable energy. Blinken reflecting on the conversations that have taken place at a G7 level with, of course, the U.S. president on being able to finance then the just energy transition. These G7 countries putting resources together to deal with the infrastructure and otherwise to be able to get this going. Another thing that was also, quite blatant is how neither of the two political principles making an explicit mention of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. In fact, Minister Naledi Pandor just sort of touching on it to say that we may not always agree on issues, but that has never ruined the friendship. I think that's about as close as we got to actually, tinkling towards that particular issue. So it's been about reflecting on the trade relations. Just last year, 20 billion rands in trade between the two countries, and as well as the investments that the U.S. has made with regards to our fight against HIV and AIDS, and of course the commitments by U.S. companies and multinationals that are currently operating within South Africa towards President Cyril Ramaphosa's investment drive, which is something that he's told us has managed to get commitments worth at least 1 trillion rand. That's the last that we heard. So that's pretty much what we got at this stage, and hopefully during our engagement with the two political principles, once that media briefing is opened, we can touch then on, those M23 rebels in the Congo, which is where, in the eastern parts of the DRC, which is where Blinken will go to after this, and the belief then by the UN Security Council that actually Rwanda is funding these rebel groups. And of course, this is a spillover from the 1994 Rwandan genocide, which spilled over into countries such as the DRC, but also touching specifically on issues of food security as a result then of that Russia-Ukraine conflict, which has had an impact, for an example, on the imports of grain.
Ziyanda Ngcobo, they also touched on the vital economic relationship between the two, and our international relations minister welcoming the growth in two-way trade from some $13.9 billion US to $21 billion US in 2021.
Absolutely, and this is exactly it, isn't it, Duja? As I've already mentioned, that from a trade perspective, the cooperation continues to exist, despite this only being Blinken's first visit to South Africa. But South Africa still largely remaining a huge trade partner for the U.S., ranking 39th last time I checked the rankings. But also in terms of being able to be the gateway to Africa, as South Africa's always been known, the African continent remains remaining key to the geopolitics of many of the superpowers, Russia and China, really penetrating the continent, and South Africa still being viewed, even geographically, being very strategic in terms of being able to do trade with the rest of the continent. So I think even the countries that were chosen by Blinken to visit were very strategic. If you look at what they've now dubbed as their launch of the Sub-Saharan Africa strategy by the U.S., and that you go to central parts of the continent, which is where you have the DRC, and towards the east, which is also very critical when you look at when you move towards the Middle East downwards on the African continent. So very critical also to deal with peace and stability on the continent when you look at that conflict in the DRC, for an example. So very interesting that even as he touched down yesterday, visiting the Hector Peterson Museum, accompanied by Hector Peterson's sister Antoinette, really also reflecting on the past, which is also what the International Relations Minister reflected on how the U.S. also, brushing over it really, that the U.S. also contributed in some ways towards the emancipation of the black majority in this country.
Well, thank you very much for that update.